The hum of the private jet's engines was a constant presence in the background, a sound that usually brought a sense of peace and comfort. Elon Musk, relaxed in his first-class seat, flipped through a few reports on his tablet, his mind partially occupied by the day's meetings. The world outside was clouded, the soft white of the sky blending into the infinite blue, creating an endless horizon. He felt at ease. After all, this was the kind of comfort he had worked his whole life to achieve: luxury, freedom, and success. But as the cabin doors slid open and the stewardess stepped aside, the atmosphere in the plane shifted. A man stepped in, his eyes scanning the cabin. His face, weathered and worn, had the marks of someone who had seen too much. He was in his mid-50s, dressed in a military jacket, faded and frayed from years of use. Jack Thompson. The man had a story written all over him, one that didn't need to be told for anyone to understand. Elon's eyes locked on the veteran, and for the first time that day, the world around him seemed to slow. As Jack shuffled forward, there was a clear sense of discomfort in his movements. He wasn't just walking to his seat. He was carrying the weight of a lifetime of experiences that no one else could comprehend. The passengers who were settled in their plush seats shifted uncomfortably. They were all aware of the discrepancy. The high-flying businessman, Elon Musk, with his tailored suit and sleek demeanor, and the weary veteran, who looked out of place in this realm of luxury. Jack hesitated for a moment in the aisle, his hand grazing the armrests of empty seats as he searched for his own. But there was no seat left in the business class section. His shoulders slumped as he turned around, making his way back toward economy, the discomfort of the situation palpable. In that instant, something shifted inside Elon. The decision, the one that had been sitting quietly in his mind for days, suddenly seemed impossible to ignore. He had the power to do something that could change the course of this flight, for him, for Jack, and perhaps even for the entire plane. The thought bubbled up in Elon's chest, one he couldn't suppress. Without hesitation, he stood up from his first-class seat. The action was smooth, practiced, as though he was performing a task he had done many times before. But this time it felt different. There was something more urgent about it, something more important than simply following the usual routine. "Excuse me," Elon said, catching the stewardess's attention. "Can you give my seat to the gentleman in the military jacket? He could use it more than I do." The stewardess blinked in surprise, looking between Elon and Jack, who was still standing in the aisle. A ripple of murmurs spread through the cabin as passengers turned their heads, clearly caught off guard by the sudden shift in power dynamics. "But, Mr. Musk," the stewardess began, clearly confused. "I'll sit back there," Elon said, his voice calm yet insistent. "He should take my seat." For a moment, the stewardess hesitated, caught between protocol and what was unfolding before her. But Elon's expression was firm. He wasn't asking for permission. This was not a request, but a quiet demand. Jack, unaware of the tension unfolding around him, still shuffled down the aisle, his gaze fixed on the ground, lost in his own world. But as he passed by Elon's seat, Elon's hand reached out, gently but decisively. "Sir," Elon said, his voice soft yet deliberate, "I think you need this more than I do." Jack's eyes darted up, momentarily startled. He blinked a few times, confused. "What?" Elon repeated. "Take my seat, please." For a long moment, Jack stood frozen, his eyes flickering between Elon and the empty seat. His pride, his military training, told him not to accept such charity. But something about Elon's tone, about the sincerity in his eyes, made him pause. He had spent his life rejecting help from others. But here, now, he felt an unfamiliar weight pressing on his chest, pulling him toward something he didn't understand. "Are you sure?" Jack asked, his voice hoarse, as if the words were difficult to form. Elon simply nodded. Without another word, Jack finally sank into the first-class seat, the leather cushioning beneath him a stark contrast to the hard realities he had faced in his life. It wasn't just the seat that was a luxury, it was the moment itself. Something had shifted, and not just for Jack, but for Elon as well. Elon, meanwhile, didn't sit back down. He turned around and walked toward the rear of the plane, making his way to the economy section. The looks from other passengers were subtle but unmistakable. There was a mix of curiosity, disbelief, and even admiration. Some whispered among themselves, unsure what to make of the scene. A billionaire mogul giving up his seat to a veteran. No one had expected that. As Elon settled into his seat in economy, he glanced back toward Jack, who was still adjusting to his new place. There was a flicker of something in Jack's eyes, a silent acknowledgement of the kindness he had just received. But for Elon, the moment wasn't just about giving up a seat. It was about something much deeper. What would come next was impossible to predict, but Elon felt a strange sense of fulfillment settling in his chest. He had made a choice, one that would ripple out far beyond this single moment in time. And as he settled back into the cramped seat, a thought lingered in his mind. What had I just done? It was a decision that, in time, would change both their lives in ways neither could anticipate. Elon Musk had always been a man who defied conventional thinking. Born in Pretoria, South Africa, in 1971, he grew up surrounded by a family that pushed him to excel. His father, Errol, was a brilliant engineer with a stern and often harsh personality. His mother, May, a Canadian-born model and dietitian, was the calming force in his life. But it was his father's drive that shaped Elon in ways both positive and negative. Elon was a curious child, one who devoured books faster than his peers. At the age of 12, he taught himself computer programming and created a video game called Blaster, which he sold for $500. It was a small win, but to Elon, it was a glimpse into a future where anything was possible. By the time he was a teenager, his mind had already been set on a singular goal: to change the world. But while his ambitions were clear, the path wasn't easy. Elon's childhood was far from idyllic. His parents divorced when he was young, and his relationship with his father, Errol, was strained. Errol, brilliant yet distant, didn't always provide the emotional support Elon desperately needed. In fact, his father's words often cut deeper than any criticism from his peers. "You're too much of a dreamer," Errol would tell him. "You'll never succeed. People like you don't change the world." It was this rejection that fueled Elon's determination to prove his father wrong. And, like many ambitious young men, Elon pushed himself to extremes. He left South Africa for Canada at the age of 17 to avoid compulsory military service and to seek greater opportunities in the United States. Eventually, he found his way to Stanford University, only to drop out just 2 days into his PhD program, chasing his entrepreneurial dreams. His early ventures were not easy. In the late 1990s, Elon co-founded Zip2, a software company that provided business directories and maps for newspapers. The company was sold for $307 million in 1999, and Elon walked away with a small fortune. But it wasn't enough. It wasn't the world-changing impact he had dreamed of. Elon's next big venture was X.com, which later became PayPal. In the world of finance and tech, PayPal was a revolutionary force. It wasn't just another online payment system. It was the future of digital transactions. However, even as his wealth grew, Elon struggled with personal relationships. His marriages faltered, and his relentless work ethic often took precedence over his personal life. It wasn't until the creation of Tesla and SpaceX that Elon truly found his place in the world of innovation. At Tesla, he set out to revolutionize the auto industry with electric cars, while SpaceX was built on the audacious dream of making humanity a multiplanetary species. Yet, despite his remarkable success in business, Elon remained an enigma, both admired and misunderstood. Elon's private life was equally complex. His first marriage to Justine Musk, a Canadian author, ended in divorce, though the two remained close. His second marriage to actress Tallulah Riley was equally tumultuous, marked by multiple separations and reconciliations. As the years passed, Elon began to realize that while he had achieved much, something was still missing. Despite his fame, wealth, and accomplishments, Elon's relationships remained fractured. He had always been too focused on his goals, too driven by the need to prove himself to others, especially his father. But in the quiet moments, when the rush of the world slowed down, Elon often wondered whether his quest for success had cost him something far more important: human connection. On this flight, as he looked out the window of his economy seat, Elon couldn't help but reflect on how far he had come. From a young boy in South Africa who dreamed of changing the world to the billionaire founder of Tesla and SpaceX, he had spent his life proving people wrong. But in doing so, he had lost sight of something simple, yet profound: the importance of empathy, of connection, and of understanding the lives of others. As he glanced back toward Jack in the first-class seat, a thought began to form in Elon's mind. What if this moment, this simple act of giving up a seat, was the thing that would change me? It was a fleeting thought, but it planted the seed of something greater. Elon had spent so many years building companies, changing industries, and accumulating wealth. But had he ever really stopped to understand the people whose lives he was affecting along the way? Had he ever truly connected with someone on a human level? For the first time in a long while, Elon felt a sense of peace, but also a sense of uncertainty. Perhaps there was more to life than just reaching for the stars. Perhaps, somewhere along the way, he had forgotten the importance of simply being present for the people around him. Elon settled into his seat at the back of the plane, surrounded by the soft buzz of passengers chatting quietly and the occasional clinking of beverage carts rolling down the aisle. The air felt different here, more grounded, less glamorous, but perhaps that was part of the reason he felt oddly at peace. The usual excitement of first-class luxuries and exclusive privileges seemed to fade into the background as he observed the world around him from a different perspective. He glanced forward toward Jack, who now sat in the first-class seat, his posture more relaxed but still tinged with an underlying sense of discomfort. Jack wasn't one to revel in the luxury of the seat he was offered. Instead, he seemed almost out of place, as though the opulence of the surroundings didn't quite mesh with the man who had lived through years of hardship and service. There was a quiet tension between them, one that both men felt but neither had voiced. Elon wasn't used to sharing such an intimate space with a stranger, especially someone whose life experiences were so vastly different from his own. Jack, on the other hand, was a man who had lived through more battles, both internal and external, than most could ever imagine. His world was one of survival, of sacrifice, and of invisible scars that ran far deeper than the physical ones. As the flight continued, Elon's thoughts returned to the moment when he had offered his seat to Jack. There had been no hesitation in his actions, but now, as time passed, doubts began to creep in. Had he done the right thing? Was it really an act of kindness, or was it just another attempt to placate some deeper, unspoken need within himself? He couldn't help but wonder if his gesture, as sincere as it had felt in the moment, had been nothing more than a fleeting act to make himself feel better. Meanwhile, Jack sat in his new seat, staring out the window, his fingers absent-mindedly tapping the armrest. Despite the luxury surrounding him, he felt anything but at ease. There was a strange weight in his chest, a mixture of gratitude, confusion, and discomfort. Jack wasn't used to receiving kindness. In his world, help didn't come easily, and certainly not from a billionaire like Elon Musk. Jack had seen too many things in his life to believe in the simplicity of altruism. In his younger years, he had served in combat zones, fought for his country, and lost more friends than he cared to count. Over the years, he had learned to accept the harsh reality that the world didn't owe anyone anything. He had been taught that sacrifice was a duty, and expectations of kindness were a luxury afforded to those who hadn't faced true hardship. But here he was, in this seat, staring at the man who had just given it up. It didn't make sense to him. Why would Elon Musk, someone who had everything, make such a gesture? Was it genuine, or was it simply another publicity stunt, a way for Elon to prove something to the world? Jack's mind raced with possibilities, but there was one thing that kept nagging at him. Why me? Elon's eyes shifted back to Jack. Their gazes met for a brief moment, and an unspoken understanding passed between them. It was subtle, but it was there. Something had shifted in the air. Jack had not expected kindness from someone like Elon, but now that it had happened, he was left to wrestle with his own confusion. "Thank you," Jack said quietly, his voice hoarse. He had no idea how to express his gratitude for such an unexpected act of generosity, especially to someone as accomplished and renowned as Elon. His pride, which had been built over decades of self-reliance and tough experiences, made it difficult to acknowledge such a simple but profound gesture. Elon nodded but didn't say anything. The words felt unnecessary, as if they couldn't capture the complexity of the moment. Instead, he simply gave Jack a faint, understanding smile before looking down at his phone, scrolling through messages from his team. The plane continued its journey across the sky, and despite the ongoing buzz of activity, there was an odd sense of quietude between the two men. The other passengers went about their business, seemingly unaware of the unspoken tension unfolding before them. But for Elon and Jack, the flight had already become something more than just a simple trip from one place to another. As the hours passed, a subtle shift began to take place. The initial act of kindness, Elon giving up his first-class seat, had begun to peel back layers in both men's hearts. For Elon, it was an unexpected reminder of the humanity he had forgotten to nurture in his pursuit of success. For Jack, it was a reminder of how much he had hardened himself against the world over the years and how difficult it was to let down those walls. But even in the quiet of the cabin, the tension between them was building. There was more to both of their stories than either was willing to admit, and as the flight progressed, the inevitability of their lives intersecting in unexpected ways became clearer. Elon didn't know it yet, but Jack was more than just a veteran in need of a seat. There was a story, an experience, a deep pain that Jack carried with him, one that could change everything. Similarly, Jack had no idea that Elon Musk, the man who had been the symbol of success and power for so many, was just as lost and conflicted as he was. The flight, which had begun with a simple exchange of seats, was slowly becoming a journey of discovery for both men. It was no longer about luxury, success, or even the simple kindness of one man's gesture. It was about something deeper, something that would pull both Elon and Jack into a world where they would have to confront not just their pasts, but the futures they were building. And as the plane soared through the sky, the question lingered between them. What happens when two very different lives collide in a moment of unspoken understanding? The plane had been cruising for hours, and as the sun dipped below the horizon, the soft glow of the cabin lights bathed the two men in a quiet, almost cinematic ambience. Elon stared out of his window, watching the vast expanse of the earth below. It was a view he had seen countless times in his private jets, but tonight, it felt different. The deep blues of the sky, the endless stretch of darkness, made him feel smaller somehow, like a tiny speck in an infinite universe. He thought about all the things that had brought him to this moment. His rise from a scrappy entrepreneur to the billionaire founder of Tesla and SpaceX, the years of sleepless nights, the constant pressure, the highs and lows of his journey. Everything he had worked for, every battle fought, every person who had doubted him, none of it seemed as important now. He had the world in his grasp, but there was something missing, something he couldn't quite put his finger on. Jack sat silently across from him, his eyes closed, lost in his own thoughts. Despite the comfort of the first-class seat, his mind was far away, racing back to memories he didn't like to revisit. The flashbacks to war, to loss, to a life of fighting for a cause that often felt bigger than himself. The years of being unseen, of being part of something that never truly acknowledged his sacrifices. He'd spent so much time pushing forward, suppressing the pain, that now, sitting in this plush chair, with the kind of luxury he never thought he'd experience, it felt foreign. What did he really want from this life? The question haunted him, not just now, but for years. He had been part of something greater, a soldier, a veteran, someone who had put his life on the line for others. But now, he was struggling to find his place in the world. His transition from military life to civilian life had been anything but smooth, and the world around him seemed to be changing faster than he could keep up. "Hey," Jack's voice broke through Elon's thoughts, deep but hesitant. "I don't know what made you do it, giving up your seat, but thank you. I don't know how I can repay you." Elon turned toward Jack, his eyes meeting the man's weary but grateful gaze. There was something vulnerable in those eyes, something raw and unspoken. For a moment, Elon hesitated. What was he supposed to say? He wasn't used to showing his emotions, especially not in such a vulnerable way. But as he looked at Jack, he found himself offering something far more valuable than words. He simply nodded. "You don't need to repay me," Elon said softly. "Sometimes, just doing the right thing is enough." Jack studied him, his brow furrowing slightly. There was something about Elon's sincerity that made the words feel heavy, like they carried more weight than usual. It was hard to imagine someone like Elon Musk, someone so successful, so powerful, saying something so simple, but somehow it resonated with Jack. "You sure about that?" Jack asked, still uncertain. "I mean, a guy like you. You've got everything. He gestured to the plush first-class seat, the luxurious surroundings. It's nothing to you. But for me, it's everything. It's a reminder that people still care. Even when I feel like the world's forgotten me." Elon stared at him for a long moment, as if Jack had just unlocked something deep within him. His gaze softened, the sharp edge of his usual confidence fading away. "I get it," he said, the words low and measured. "I've spent most of my life focused on building companies, pushing the boundaries of technology, trying to save the world in my own way. But sometimes, we forget to just see the people right in front of us, the ones who need it the most." Jack's eyes narrowed, and for the first time in a long time, a genuine smile crossed his face. It was a smile that wasn't born from cynicism, but from a sense of understanding. "You're right about that." There was an undeniable shift between them now. What started as a simple act of kindness, a billionaire giving up his first-class seat for a veteran, had blossomed into something far more profound. Neither man had expected it, but something was changing between them, something that would pull both of their lives into a new direction. The conversation between them grew deeper. They began to share stories of their lives. Elon, growing up in South Africa, the challenges he faced to prove himself to his father and the world. Jack, recounting his years in the military, the brothers in arms he had lost, the struggles of transitioning back into civilian life. Their worlds seemed miles apart, but in that moment, there was a powerful connection, a shared understanding of sacrifice, ambition, and the human need for recognition and validation. But as their bond deepened, so did the tension. There were things both men hadn't said, parts of their stories they weren't ready to share. The emotional walls they had spent years building up were starting to crumble, but the fear of what that would mean held them back. For Elon, this was a moment of reflection, of realizing just how far he had drifted from the human connections he had once valued. His life had become a series of milestones and achievements, but in his quest for success, he had overlooked the very people who made his success possible. He had built a legacy, but at what cost? Jack, too, was faced with his own demons. He had spent so many years suppressing his feelings, masking his pain with humor and bravado. But now, sitting next to Elon Musk, someone who had built an empire, who had changed the world in ways Jack could never have imagined, he couldn't help but wonder if he had been running from his own potential all along. As the flight continued into the night, both men sat in quiet contemplation. The conversations had ended, but the questions remained. What had they learned from each other? Could this moment, this unexpected act of kindness, be the turning point for both of them? They were on a journey now, one neither of them had anticipated. And as the hours ticked by, one thing became clear. The bond they had formed was just the beginning. Their lives were about to be altered in ways neither of them could foresee. The cabin lights dimmed even further as the flight soared into the night. The soft hum of the plane's engines was the only sound, creating a serene atmosphere that felt strangely isolating. Outside, the stars blinked against the vast blackness of space, distant and unreachable, much like the emotions that were building inside Elon and Jack. Elon felt a weight on his chest, an unfamiliar pressure, as if the walls he'd spent years constructing around himself were slowly cracking. His mind kept returning to Jack's words, "For me, it's everything." That simple line had unsettled him more than he cared to admit. Elon Musk, the visionary who had brought humanity closer to Mars, was now faced with a question that was far more difficult to answer than any technical challenge he'd ever encountered. What really matters? It wasn't that he didn't know the answer. He had built a life that was about breaking barriers and achieving the impossible. Yet, sitting here in this dimly lit cabin, a nagging question wouldn't let him go. Why had he built so much? For who? For what? He had so many people who admired him, who relied on him, but what did it all mean if he couldn't connect on a deeper level? He glanced over at Jack, who was looking out the window, lost in thought. The man had seen things, endured things that Elon could never fully comprehend. And yet, there they were, two men, worlds apart in terms of wealth, status, and experience, connected by a shared moment that neither of them could explain. Elon wasn't used to feeling vulnerable. He was the man who could change the course of history with a tweet, the person who built companies that revolutionized entire industries. He was a symbol of power, of progress. But tonight, he was just a man who had given up his seat to someone who needed it more. His thoughts were interrupted by a soft voice. "I have to ask," Jack said, his gaze still fixed on the dark horizon. "Why did you do it?" Elon felt a lump form in his throat. This was the moment, the one he had been avoiding. There was no turning back now. "I don't know," Elon replied quietly. His voice was uncharacteristically soft, almost reflective. "Maybe I needed to feel like I wasn't just the guy who built rockets and electric cars. Maybe I needed to feel like I could do something good, something that wasn't measured in dollars or achievements. I've spent so much of my life looking at the future, I forgot to look at the people around me." Jack turned to him, a mix of surprise and understanding in his eyes. "You're just like all the rest of us, aren't you?" His voice was low, but there was a certain warmth in his tone. "We all get lost in the noise, in what we think we should be doing, and forget what really matters." For a long moment, neither man spoke. The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. In that silence, they both understood something profound. They were two people who had been living in parallel worlds, each struggling with their own internal battles, each questioning what success truly meant. Jack finally broke the silence. "I spent so many years thinking that if I just kept my head down, kept moving forward, I'd eventually find peace. But I don't know if that's true. I don't know if I'll ever be at peace with what I've seen, with what I've lost." He paused, his gaze steady on Elon. "But maybe peace isn't something you find. Maybe it's something you build, one day at a time." Elon's heart thudded in his chest. He had heard similar sentiments before, in boardrooms, in the headlines, in interviews. But hearing them from Jack, this man who had fought for his country, who had sacrificed more than Elon could ever imagine, made it all the more real. The truth hit him like a freight train. All his success, all his money, none of it had prepared him for this moment. None of it had prepared him for the understanding that real fulfillment didn't come from achievements or accolades. It came from connection, from shared experiences, from understanding the struggles and joys of those around you. Elon had spent so much of his life chasing after the next big thing, the next goal, the next revolution, but in doing so, he had neglected the most fundamental thing, the people he was supposed to be doing it for. "You're right," Elon said finally, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "Maybe we don't find peace. Maybe we just have to choose it. Choose to be present. Choose to help where we can. Choose to see the humanity in each other." Jack smiled softly, the kind of smile that reached his eyes. "Yeah, maybe that's all we need to do." There it was, the emotional climax, a moment of profound realization that neither man had expected. In the quiet space between them, they had found something greater than themselves, a shared humanity, a recognition that both of them, despite their vastly different paths, were looking for the same thing. A sense of purpose, a sense of connection, a sense of peace. For Jack, it was a moment of clarity. The years of emotional scars, of feeling like an outsider, had begun to fade. Maybe he wasn't as alone as he had always believed. Maybe there was more to life than just surviving. And maybe, just maybe, he had something to offer the world after all. For Elon, it was a revelation. All the money, the power, the fame, none of it mattered if he couldn't find a way to connect with others. He had always thought that being a visionary meant looking to the future, but now he realized that true vision required seeing people, truly seeing them, and understanding their pain, their joy, their needs. Both men were changed in that moment, in that quiet exchange. The realization that what they had been chasing wasn't the end goal. It was the journey towards something more meaningful. They were no longer just two men on a plane. They were two men who had been forever altered by the simple act of giving up a seat, of seeing the humanity in one another. And as the flight continued, neither of them spoke. The words had been said, and the understanding had been shared. They both knew that this moment would stay with them for the rest of their lives, guiding them in ways they couldn't yet understand. But one thing was certain: their lives had intersected for a reason, and the path they would walk from here would be forever different. The plane began its descent, and as the city lights below twinkled like stars scattered across the earth, Elon and Jack found themselves once again in the midst of an unspoken moment. The quiet that had settled between them was not uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that only comes after deep, shared understanding. The world around them felt smaller now, less important in comparison to the weight of their conversations, their revelations. As the flight attendants moved through the cabin preparing for landing, Elon looked at Jack one last time. The man had dozed off for a while, his head resting against the window, a peaceful expression on his face, which contrasted sharply with the intensity of their earlier talks. Elon studied him, thinking about the experiences Jack had lived through, the years of service, the trauma, the sacrifices. He had given up so much for others, yet, when given the chance to be recognized, all he seemed to want was connection. In that moment, Elon realized something profound. Recognition, real recognition, was not about accolades or titles, but about the simple act of being seen. It was about human connection, about offering support when it mattered most. Jack had shown him that, and perhaps, in some way, Jack had given him a glimpse of the true meaning of success, something beyond the billion-dollar companies, the groundbreaking innovations, the constant quest for achievement. For the first time in a long while, Elon felt content. The pressure he often carried to save the world, to always be moving forward, seemed less suffocating. He didn't need to be perfect. He didn't need to change everything overnight. What mattered now was the relationships he built, the way he connected with people, and the impact he had on those around him. Not just through his work, but through his actions, his kindness, his humanity. As the plane touched down, a rush of excitement filled the cabin. The passengers began to stir, preparing for their arrival, and the familiar hum of activity returned. But for Elon and Jack, the journey they had embarked on was far from over. They had crossed a threshold, one that would change them both in ways they hadn't fully understood yet. Once the plane came to a stop, Jack stood up, stretching his legs and cracking his neck, before offering Elon a look that was equal parts gratitude and camaraderie. The exchange had been quiet, but everything had been said. "You okay?" Elon asked, his voice carrying the weight of their conversation. Jack smiled, but it was different this time. Genuine, without any hesitation. "Yeah, I think I am." He paused, then added, "I don't know if I'll ever stop struggling with everything I've been through, but I feel like maybe I'm not alone in it. I've never had anyone just see me like you did. You don't understand how much that means." Elon nodded. "I think I get it more than you think." The words hung in the air, unspoken but deeply felt. Neither man knew what would come next, but they both understood that something had shifted. What had started as a random encounter on a plane had blossomed into something neither could have anticipated. A chance to reflect on their lives, their struggles, and ultimately their need for human connection. As they gathered their belongings, ready to leave the aircraft, Elon found himself reflecting on the choices he had made in the past, about the people he had kept at arm's length, about the relationships he had ignored in favor of professional ambitions. The ambition hadn't changed, of course. He would still strive to push humanity toward the future, still work to create the technologies that could change the world. But now, there was a renewed sense of balance. He didn't need to be the hero in every story. He didn't need to do everything alone. Jack, on the other hand, had taken something just as profound away from their conversation. For years, he had measured his life by the things he had lost, the sacrifices he had made. But sitting next to Elon, this man who had everything and yet still struggled with similar feelings of isolation, Jack realized that his value wasn't tied to what he had lost or endured. It wasn't about the wars he'd fought or the things he had done in service to his country. It was about the relationships he built, the way he showed up for others, and the way he allowed himself to connect with the world, even when it seemed impossible. He could change. He could grow. And perhaps for the first time, he was ready to. They disembarked from the plane together, stepping into the terminal, and the world outside felt a little different. The rush of people, the chatter of voices, the busy atmosphere of the airport. It all seemed a bit more welcoming now. The crowd was no longer an overwhelming blur of strangers, but a sea of individuals, each with their own stories, their own struggles. As they walked toward the exit, Elon turned to Jack one last time. "You know," he said, a grin spreading across his face, "if you ever need a ride to Mars, you know where to find me." Jack chuckled, shaking his head in disbelief. "I think I'll stick to Earth for now, but I appreciate the offer." They shared a laugh, the first real moment of lightheartedness since their conversation had begun. But even with the joke, both knew that the conversation had been transformative. Their lives had intersected at a pivotal moment, and it had changed them both. They exchanged a firm handshake, a gesture that held more meaning than either could express. And as they parted ways, heading into their separate futures, they both carried with them the knowledge that life wasn't just about success, fame, or accomplishment. It was about people. It was about connection, empathy, and understanding. And perhaps in the end, that was the greatest success of all.